What's happening, people? It is Brian with NeverState.com, and today's video is going to be part one of a three-part series on the deadlift. Now, if you've been a channel for any amount of time at all, you've probably seen the squat series, and some of you found that helpful, so I'm going to try to do the same thing with the deadlift. I've just hesitated in making this video for so long because I feel like there's so many good resources and so many amazing videos out there about the deadlift already that I'm not sure I have a ton to add to the conversation. But I can show you some of the things that have worked for me, and hopefully they will work for you. Now, this first video in the series is going to be dealing with your setup, which doesn't seem that complex on the surface, but it is. So many people miss reps because either they can't break the bar off the floor or the bar does come off the floor and then they miss it at lockout. And both of those issues have everything to do with your setup. A lot of coaches will tell you if you can't break the bar off the floor, then you have issues with your leg drive, which could be true. And then other lifters can rip the bar off the ground, but they can't lock it out. A lot of people would tell you that's upper back strength, so you should be doing rack pulls and things like that, and that also could be true. But in my experience with most beginner and intermediate lifters, the problem is less about the strength and it's more about technique, which has 100% to do with the setup. That's why this whole video is going to be dedicated to it. Now, these are just a couple basic tips that have worked for me. This list definitely isn't exhaustive, but I would encourage you each time that you go into work the deadlift that you pick 2 or 3 things to work on, because if you try to fix everything at once, you're not going to get anything done. It's also going to be super important for you to be videotaping your sets from a couple different angles. Your perception of the situation and the reality are often two very different things. I can't tell you how many times I thought that I performed a deadlift perfectly, and then I reviewed the video footage and I was all jacked up. Conversely, there's been times when I thought the rep was super slow or that I was out of shape. I check out the video and I did better than I thought, so then I was able to add more weight. Your perception is not reality, so take some videos. Yes, you're gonna feel self-conscious and stupid at first, at least I do. But those videos are data, and if you have data, you can self-assess and self-correct. If you don't have video, you're just shooting in the dark. You can tell yourself that you're awesome, you can believe that you're awesome, but reality could be very different. But you're probably pretty awesome. But anyway, let's get started on fixing your setup and hopefully moving more weight on the deadlift. All right, so we're gonna start out body positioning. I know for a lot of you this seems very, very basic, but for some of you it's not. And if you are experienced, you should know better than anybody that you need to have those basics down, otherwise things get really screwed up along the way. So don't skip over this, because maybe there's something you've forgotten, or maybe there's something that you've never seen before. Give these things a try. All right, when lining up for the conventional deadlift, you're gonna wanna take the bar and split the middle of your foot with it. Just like when lifting anything else heavy, you're gonna wanna keep the weight as close to your body as possible. If you're gonna pick up another human being, you wouldn't do it with your arms straight out in front of you. You would hug them as tight as possible. That's where you have the most leverage. And it's gonna be the exact same thing with the barbell. You can't get closer to your midline than over the middle of your foot, so that's the absolute best position to start. When you're first figuring out where the middle of your foot is, have a partner line up to the side and look for you. Because when you look straight down, what you think is the middle of your foot, a lot of times isn't. You're actually out in front. For me, when the bar is over the middle of my foot, it usually covers the tongue of my shoe, but it's best to have a partner just check it out so you get used to it. Now, as far as the width on your stance, if you ask 1,000 different people, you're gonna get 1,000 different answers. This is gonna vary greatly from individual to individual, and really it's just trial and error, figuring out what works best for you. For me personally, I like to keep my feet a little wider than my shoulders, and then I point my toes slightly outward at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock. The reason why I point my toes out is because that allows me to drive my knees out against my elbows, which keeps my knees from collapsing during the lift and usually gives me a little more leg drive. If you're not doing that, give that a shot. Now, as far as your hands are concerned, you just want to keep them as close to your legs as you possibly can so that you're not lifting from any more of a deficit than you absolutely need to. The further out you place your hands, the lower the starting point, which is not conducive to lifting as much weight as you possibly can. That's why you can't move as much weight on the snatch grip deadlift or the deficit deadlift. Keep your hands as close as possible so you can move as much weight as possible. When you set your grip, it's gonna be super important to over grab the bar and then bring it out just like it was a wet towel. This is gonna allow you to use your callus as a speed bump, so it's just gonna be one more obstacle for the bar to get past if it's gonna fall out of your hands. Which brings us to your hips. Now, how high you start your hips is gonna greatly vary from lifter to lifter, but one thing that you can keep in mind is that your hips should always be below your shoulders. The way some people are built, their hips are gonna be way below their shoulders, and for other people, they're gonna kind of be pushing that line a little bit. But one thing that you're definitely gonna wanna be careful of, and this is why videotaping your sets is so important, is making sure that your hips don't shoot up before the bar leaves the ground. So if you're watching your video and you see your hips shoot up before the bar leaves the ground, the best advice that I can give you is to start with your hips at that highest point, as long as it's below your shoulders. Any extra movement in the deadlift is complicating things, and you want the movement to be as efficient as possible. If your hips kick up before the bar leaves the ground, you're adding a movement to the exercise, and that's gonna mess you up and really raise your chance of injury, as well as missing a lift, which is always terrible. Now, you guys know I like me some object lessons, so I want you to think of your deadlift like a crane lifting up a heavy object. Just like with this string, a crane is going to adjust the weight until it is 90 degrees perpendicular to the ground before it will actually lift it off. This is why a lot of people have problems when they go to lift off a deadlift and it floats out in front of them. All this extra movement in the deadlift is your body doing nothing but trying to get itself in its most efficient position to lift something. If your shoulders are way over the bar, physics will not allow that weight to leave the ground until it hits a perpendicular 90-degree angle. That's why figuring out your body positioning is so important. Now let's talk about a couple things that need to happen before the pull occurs. Your breathing and bracing is more important than just about anything and is way too broad of a topic for me to cover in this video. But luckily for you, my friend, there is a link right around here. Is an entire video where I cover breathing and bracing. Make sure you check that out because you need to have that down before you're even thinking about lifting anything heavy. Some people are like me and they like to get their breath before they even bend down the barbell, and I will hold that same breath until the rep is complete. But you have to be careful that your form is on point because your brain needs air, and air is important. But if your technique is not ingrained, or some people just choose to get their breath while they're down the barbell, I would recommend raising your hips just so you uncollapse your diaphragm a little bit so you can get as much air into your belly as possible. The more air you can fit into your stomach, the more weight you're gonna lift. All right, so now you've got your body positioning aligned and you have that huge breath of air. Your next step is to get your lats involved. There's a couple different cues that people use for this, one being sticking your shoulder blades in your back pocket. Another one that I've heard is covering your armpit with your shoulders. Me personally, I like to bend the bar across my shins like it's a horseshoe. But all three cues are describing the same thing, and that is getting your lats involved in the movement. So when you look at this deadlift from the side, this is me pulling with relaxed lats, and you can see the big triangle between my arm, my body, and my leg. You want to shrink that triangle as much as possible by pulling the bar towards you and getting your lats involved. Your lats are a huge muscle group that you may not be using on deadlift, and that means you're not lifting as much as you possibly could. Also, if your lats are contracted and involved in the motion, you have a lot less chance of lower back rounding, which should keep you safer and help you pull more weight. So bend the bar across shins. Yes, you may become bloody, but you lift more weight, which is like being more awesome. Being more awesome is good. Write that down. Also, don't forget that while you're bending that bar across shins, you should be squeezing it like it owes you money. Squeeze as hard as you possibly can and don't stop squeezing until the rep is done. All right, to recap, your body positioning should be good. You should have as much air in your belly as you possibly can, and you should be braced like a giraffe is about ready to kick you. You are squeezing the bar as hard as you possibly can and bending it across your shins to get your lats involved. Now it is time to pull the slack out of the bar and slack out of your body. This is one thing that took me a very long time to learn, and I still struggle with it, as do most people. It's gonna be really important for you to check out those videos and be self-assessing because you're probably not pulling as much slack out of the bar in your body as you think you do. Do not jerk the bar off the ground. You are not getting any more power. I know you think you are, but you're not, so stop. There should be a visible flex in the bar, and your arms should not have any bend in them at all, nor should anywhere else in your body. This is gonna be the very last thing you do before the bar leaves the ground. Make sure you have all that slack out and then put everything you have into the movement. If you try to go 0 to 100 directly off the ground without pulling the slack out, you're gonna get some really weak energy transfer, and you're probably gonna pull your body a little bit out of position, which is gonna mess you up and could possibly end you up in the hospital. Don't do that. All right, guys, I know this was a little technical and a little bit tedious, but these are the basics, and the basics are the most important thing. You need these down before you can advance whatsoever. If this was our review for you and you've heard it all before, I do apologize. But if you're anything like me, sometimes it's good to get some basic reminders that you can reapply to your training. To everyone else, I hope this was helpful. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series where we actually lift something. The tighter your setup, the better the lift's gonna go and the more weight that you're gonna move, so you really cannot practice these basics enough. Remember that strength is a skill and technique is king, so you're gonna wanna practice and practice and practice to get as much out of your leverages as you possibly can. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you did find this helpful, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button down below so that I have a better idea of what type of content you guys are looking for. But until then, keep working hard, do something amazing with your lives, and I will catch up with you later in the week.